Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 45th meeting of Soteria's, the 12th of May 2024. And we have another blind date or blind dates introduced by Stead. So let's go straight into it.
Welcome, everyone. There used to be an occasional series on Radio 3 called The Innocent Ear, where pieces of classical music were played without any information as to the subject or the composer. And I think it's a very healthy way of engaging with any work, not to have any preconceived ideas, really. I'm not sure whether one could say you use the phrase the innocent mind, in terms of reading, but perhaps that is as good as any other, or the unprejudiced mind. I've got two texts that we can read. Ideally, just one, but I don't want to waste people's time. And if after half an hour or so, if one of the texts, which I have absolutely no idea as to its quality, proves to be not worth the time to read, then we can switch to the other one. The other one is a safer option. I know enough about it to know that it will be of some interest in a variety of respects. But the first text is really a blind date. It's something that I'm not going to say anything at all about. But it is a novel. It's a work of fiction, and I personally am quite curious to read it. So with that, shall we proceed? Mm-hmm. And as I said, if after about half an hour someone feels, oh, this is intolerable, then we can switch to the other one, which is a safe.
Okay, option. I just have one question, Stead. Is this a blind date for you as well, then, this first one?
Oh, yes. I mean, but
that's very okay. Yeah.
Neither. I saw your notice, which suggested that these were things I'd read, and I thought,
yes, that's what I assumed.
It wasn't worth asking you to send out another notice to say no, I haven't. I mean, right. A blind date is a blind date whereby you've not actually. In terms of a date, you've not met the woman at all. So,
well, I was sort of thinking the person introducing it is more like the agency, if we pursue the analogy. But fine.
Yeah, no, I can see that that's a totally valid interpretation. Right, let's let us get on with it. And yeah, let's see. Yes, can everyone see it? This is Victoriana the Fairy Queen is the name of the first chapter of this work. Now, Edith, you've not been here for a while, so maybe you'd like to begin.
Victoriana the Fairy Queen. As even the longest journey begins with the first small step, so a cosmic tragedy proceeds inexorably from a knock on the door. Only silence and darkness existed, and a solid wooden door, whose outline he could vaguely see as it glowed slightly warmer than the cold stone surround. He slammed his fist into it 3 times at 1-second intervals, resulting in a deadened, muted sound, and waited, growing more impatient and irritated with every passing second, since this was supposed to be his sabbatical. The fact that he had been summoned at all was curious, since there was nothing here that could pose a threat as far as he knew. Proceed to number 19 and then find a particular person on a particular date in a particular place. The phrasing was, he knew, precise, which is why it troubled him. In essence, it told him to retrieve, recruit, protect, no matter what the cost, and to keep everything secret. It was normally a menial task, and it greatly annoyed him that the courier were treating him like a common errand boy, as if he answered to them. Doubly so, because not only was he not allowed to question the orders, but they arrived so late that he had not the time to properly change. It all reeked of panic and incompetence, and he indulged in some retribution fantasies to pass the time as he stewed in his indignation. Meanwhile, he considered kicking the door in, but had the sense to wait. It always had to be 3 knocks. It was tradition with a capital T. They loved their comfort rituals that made them feel like they were still one of us. And he did not do it as expected. And if he did not do it as expected, they would get annoyed by his petty abuse of power. The ossification of the younger generation, he thought, or perhaps it was because such people felt isolated in the borderlands, far from the safety of home. It was bad enough where he had just come from, and he suspected this was much worse. Okay, I'll let someone else take over now.
Oh, okay. Michael, in France, perhaps would you continue?
Okay. Why recruit from these people? It was almost unheard of, troubling, and possibly unethical. The door opened, and a yellow light from an oil lamp illuminated a man and a woman standing before him, both middle-aged and conservatively dressed. "Welcome to 19, sir. We have never had a hound, a person of your seniority. Sorry." She looked nervous and embarrassed, no doubt sensing his mood, so he reined it in and flipped his persona to a more businesslike and friendly version. "Don't worry. I've heard the word used before and it doesn't bother me." And dropped the sir. "My name is Carl. Pleased to meet you." They were, he realized, not merely playing the role, but were seriously old school. "May I present my wife, Alexandra? I am William Garrett. We are both members of the Curia." They shook hands and visibly relaxed, all very local and conventional, he was pleased to note, with William dressed in black trousers and a jacket with a white shirt and starched collar. His balding pate and mutton-chopped whiskers made him look like a genuine country vicar. His wife was similarly attired in a black dress and white highlights, both radiating respectability. "Do either of you know why I'm here?" he asked, quickly adding, "That's not a trick question, by the way," not wanting them to think he was checking on them and risk their becoming formal and minimally cooperative. Sometimes the Curia were rather touchy about such matters, especially if they felt their autonomy or authority was being undermined. Shaking their heads in the negative, they studied him with a practiced eye before asking the standard question. "Do you have any?" He knew what they were going to ask and cut them short with a curt, "No, unfortunately, I'm in a hurry." It was not what he was carrying or wearing that was a problem. All the potentially offending items had been left behind as usual. He had been through this many times, although he had never come this far. It was what he lacked that was going to be problematic. "If I may say so, Carl, you are not dressed appropriately for the society with whom you are about to engage. We have some clothes that may fit you, so it won't take much to tidy you up. Meantime, come into the drawing room and sit down while I rummage through the wardrobes. Alexandra can get you the usual accessories." Through the large window, he looked out onto an early morning in spring, bright and crisp. A typical middle-class abode, he thought, complete with mementos from their travels and assorted knickknacks. It all presented an impression of clutter and over-decoration, although the carriage clock on the sideboard was rather nice. He had a weakness for elaborate mechanical devices, especially the more aesthetically pleasing ones, since back home such things were extremely rare. The Garretts certainly seemed to be playing their parts well, although all this may be for the laity and other employees or guests who ventured in. No gas lighting this far from the town, but lamps were scattered about the room. He could smell the paraffin hidden among the other odors, predominantly those of beeswax polish on the oak floor, food, and dominating everything was the archetypal aroma of carbolic soap. The first to return was Mrs. Garrett with a small engraved wooden box inlaid with ivory, which she opened with a key. Inside were some coins, 20 gold sovereigns, 8 half-crowns, 10 shillings, 5 pennies, a couple of halfpennies, and a farthing. Additionally, there was a folding knife and a used ticket, which he examined. It was from the SS Bothnia, a Cunard ship plying the New York and Boston to Liverpool route. It was dated 1889, about a year previously.
Okay.
Third class, he noted with approval, since nobody remembers the denizens of the lower decks, or at least nobody important. We thought that since you are going to stand out, you might as well be an American, only over here a few months. If anyone asks, you can tell them you have relatives here. We will vouch for you, if necessary, as distant cousins. But if you need help or have to give someone long-term contact details, take this card. The gentleman concerned will provide aid if necessary. However, we have obviously not had time to inform him of your arrival. It may take several days. The address on the card may also be used for correspondence. Carl looked at the card and read the name Samuel Little McGregor Mathers, which he recognized. It was somewhat surprising, but which, in hindsight, made perfect sense. Laity or curia? Laity, do you know how long you will be here? Came the reply. I expect at most a couple of weeks. I assume the money will cover any accommodation expenses in London? A rhetorical question, since they knew their jobs. Well, despite my poor preparation, I have memorized various maps, and any slips in terms of modern language, accent, manners, and mores can be attributed to me being a foreigner. He had long ago learned that being a foreigner in a foreign land was a lot safer and drew far less attention than trying to blend in and failing. Being not quite right drew immediate suspicion, even if the locals could not conspicuously put their finger on what was wrong or out of place. People had a remarkable talent for spotting the other. Best to give them a convenient and obvious explanation that would stop them digging deeper. Thank you, Alexandra, he said, deliberately using her first name. You've done an excellent job at short notice, and I shall enjoy being an American on holiday. At that point, William entered carrying a long coat and a large hat. A leather duster coat and a Stetson, all very American. Your denim trousers and cotton shirt are appropriate, as are the boots. He idly wondered who had come through here and left this unusual clothing behind, and surreptitiously sniffed it, but there was nothing of note. Probably worn by one of us, he mused. It would certainly look out of place in this locale, but hopefully not too exotic for the cosmopolitan London of 1890. More than a century lay between his previous visit and now, and times most definitely do change. Even though he hated cities, he was safer from discovery in them than in some village full of superstitious snoops. He really did not like to kill people just for being vicious idiots. More to the point, it upset the web, and ripples of cause and effect made the world unpredictable. I don't suppose you will consider a haircut. Carl's reddish blonde hair fell past his shoulders, and he was grateful that wigs were no longer an indispensable fashion item. No, was the answer, as he tied it back. Well, good luck, sir, Carl. Well, good luck, sir, Carl. Since you have been sent here, might we be expecting trouble of some kind? William asked. He told them sincerely that he had no more of an idea than they did, but best to be cautious. Well, the Curia has a lot invested in this project, so please don't upset the apple cart unless it's really necessary. We are not at the point where we can exert enough control if things get out of hand. Which thought, Carl, was his way of telling him to maintain a discreet presence, not get involved with the locals or tell anyone who or what he truly was.
Oh, thanks, Michael. Janine, would you like to continue?
After making inquiries as to directions from the society to the nearest town, St. Albans, Carl asked Alexandra for a list of items he might need and the expected prices he should pay. Everything from a loaf of bread to a train ticket to the cost of hiring a hansom or riding in a horse bus, and whether tipping was expected and at what percentage rate. It was best not to stand out by being either too stingy or too generous. He had 6 hours to get to Tuesday, hall in Whitechapel, East London, and meet one Emily Mackenzie, aged 29 years, supposedly still alive. He knew the name of that desperately poor area because of the recent Ripper murders, and he was keen to neither run across him nor be mistaken for him. His ignorance of the contemporary world was going to be a major source of frustration and therefore danger. Miss Mackenzie was apparently due to attend a lecture, subject unknown. In fact, he did not know for sure whether she was single or married, but the fact that she still shared her parents' surname suggested the former. If she was married or he misled her, the assignment got far more difficult as he was only given the address of her parents in a rather well-to-do part of the West End. In his mind, he brought up the rather worn photograph he had been shown, which was probably taken within the past couple of years. It showed a young woman with lean, regular, rather pointed features and hair tied back in a bun. Not unattractive, but nothing eye-catching either. Given the lightness of her eyes, they were probably blue, so the hair, he guessed, may be brown. The eyes were staring intensely into the camera. Sanpaku eyes, as the Japanese called the look, often associated with either madness or illness, and always misfortune. He could deduce nothing of her circumstance or demeanor, apart from the fact that she was not working class. But there could be no plan of action until he laid eyes upon her. He hated these impromptu expeditions because something nearly always went wrong, and often people died because of it. Who are you, Emily Mackenzie? What makes you the most important person in the world, he thought, because that's what his presence implied. William delivered him to the railway station in a horse-drawn cart, an hour later, and the porter helped ensure he got onto the correct train, 3rd class. Next stop, St. Pancras. The capital city of the greatest empire the world had ever seen was a stinking quagmire of filth, disease, poverty, and an all-pervasive stench of coal smoke and horse dung, with an undertone of sewage and rotting meat. It overpowered his sense of smell, and he wondered how animals like dogs that had a nose as sensitive as his could stand. The air in St. Albans was clean and clear, but here there was a visible haze as he looked into the distance, and he noted the buildings were grimy with soot deposits. He was grateful that breathing was mostly an optional extra as he strode out on the Euston Road. At least there were wide pavements which minimized the necessity to venture onto the cobbled road with its random piles of manure spread far and wide by the wheels of cabs, carriages, and wagons. The people looked short and stunted, and many had an almost skeletal appearance. He had read that the average height for men was 5 feet 5 inches, so he assumed that his 6'4" made him look like a giant. He stood by the side of the road, appearing every bit the foreigner, just staring at the people and traffic, paying particular attention as to how fellow travelers summoned cabs. He idly wondered whether one of the cabbies would spot him as an easy touch and pull up in order to try his luck and overcharge him. The noise was surpassing, as was the amount of traffic, it seemed. Iron-rimmed wheels on stone did not make for a quiet journey, it seemed. There also appeared to be some etiquette involved, as he noticed a passenger made a hand signal to the driver, who sat above and to the rear of him, as well as shouting to try and convey his instructions over the din. He knew, the way to the hall, in theory, from maps, but had no idea what the lay of the land might be or what he might encounter in terms of the buildings, not to mention the state of any roads as he moved away from what he assumed was considered the relatively civilized center of London. So despite having plenty of time, he chose the easy option and raised his arm at the passing cabs. Better by far to be early than late. Within seconds, when I pulled up next to him with a "Where to, sir?" the reply was, of course, the name of the hall and its location on Commercial Street in Whitechapel near Spitalfields Market. Predictably, cabby did not know of the hall, but he did know of the market. Climbing aboard the contraption was somewhat disconcerting as his weight made the cab flex and bounce on its springs. and the horse took a step back to keep its balance. After gaining his seat, they set off after negotiating a price he suspected was exorbitant, but this was not time for parsimony, nor was it his money. It
Oh,
took
thanks. Oh, Heward, maybe we'd like to continue.
It took about 40 minutes to cover the distance, which was less than 3 miles. He could have walked faster as well as got a better view. Sitting in a hansom was like wearing a poke bonnet. It might be good for shielding one from wind, sun, and rain, but it was at the expense of visibility, especially given that the reins of the horse passed in front of the passengers.
right.
In fact, the best view was of the rear end of the horse, although a flat vertical board mercifully hid its hindquarters. It did nothing for the smell, though, nor did it damp the noise of the dung hitting the road. After decamping, he found himself outside the entrance to the market, a rather dilapidated affair with some building work in progress, and set off in a southerly direction along Commercial Street toward the river. It was unusually wide for a London street and could comfortably accommodate 5 wagons side by side, with the pavements actually being paved and easy to walk upon. It was lined with shops and businesses, which one might have expected given its name. Awnings stretched into the rear distance on both sides, and there were a considerable number of people out and about this Saturday afternoon. He watched as one young woman crossed the road at a flipping pace as she dodged between the vehicles while hitching up her skirt to avoid its hem touching any malodorous material. He noticed various men paying special attention to her now exposed ankles. Something had changed. By his estimation, the hall was only a few hundred yards further on, but within a short distance he found he was being followed by a gaggle of half a dozen children, mostly a tough-looking group, dressed like adults, complete with flat caps for the boys and dirty dresses for the girls, but all curious about his size. They appeared to be quite young, mostly well under 10 years, since older ones were probably at work. One of the girls planted her feet inside his gigantic boot, and then they all wanted to do it. Carl was not overly keen on getting too close to them, since they were almost certainly infested with just about every parasite known to this country, from worms to nits and fleas to lice. Whatever diseases they carried did not worry him, but things that could infest his clothing did, especially considering the company he was about to keep. They also appeared malnourished, and at least one of them had the slightly bandy legs that come with chronic malnutrition or rickets. But these were life's winners. Most children died before the age of 5. Looking at their smiling, curious faces, he contemplated their fate over the next 50 or 60 years, feeling grateful he would not see it. He was beginning to hate this place, despite having seen much worse elsewhere and elsewhen. Then came the flood of questions, everything from who he was to where he came from to how tall, and the eternal, "Can you spare some change, sir?" Since he needed to get rid of them, and since he spied a sweet shop nearby, he led them across the road to J. Matthews, with the names of confectionery companies written on the windows, Roundtree, Mackintosh, Fry's, and displays of their wares visible through the glass. He recognized all the names, including the rather vile Victory V licorice lozenges. Telling them to stay there, he dodged inside, withdrew a shilling from his pocket, and asked the disapproving white-aproned woman behind the counter for as much broken toffee as it would buy. Once outside, he distributed the loot, told them to go away before walking briskly onwards. Toynbee Hall, at this point formerly opened for only 5 years and relatively new, was built in the Tudor Gothic style of an Oxford college as a deliberate and stark contrast to its environs. It was intended to be an oasis of education and privilege, placed for the benefit of local people by Canon Samuel Barnett and his wife Henrietta. They named it for their friend and fellow social reformer Arnold Toynbee, who had unfortunately died some 7 years previously, and it was a hub of radical politics and thought. The building was obvious as soon as he laid eyes on it, being constructed of warm red brick with box stone dressings, stone mullioned and transomed leaded light windows, multiple tall ribbed chimneys, and steeply gabled roofs with ivy beginning to climb the front walls. It was set back from the road to a considerable degree, and in its courtyard and against the wall rested a lone slatted bench, currently unoccupied.
Oh, thanks. You would maybe Michael Alcala would continue.
Yeah. The main entrance itself was paradoxically at the side of the building, and as he removed his hat and entered, a formidable-looking matron inquired as to his business. "Good afternoon, madam. If I may introduce myself, my name is Carl Dulac, late of the United States of America. I am here for the lecture. Actually, I'm here to meet a friend who will be coming, or so I have been told. Can you help me, please?" Which was the truth, and again he inwardly cursed the lack of information, not even knowing what the lecture was about, who was speaking, or indeed anything pertinent about it, save the time and the fact he was 90 minutes early. Once again, being a foreigner and guest seemed to take the edge off her suspicions, whatever they might have been. He knew that he was clearly not dressed respectably, and therefore not the object of easy acceptance and trust, especially in this area. Indeed, he could quite accept that it might appear as a dangerous ruffian, and found it mildly annoying when someone was right, but for the wrong reasons. When she inquired as to whether she might know his friend, he simply stated that he felt it was unlikely. There was too much about this that was...
Sorry, this one, yeah.
There was too much about this that was being kept from him, and that implied he should do the same to everybody else if he were wise. Apparently, the meeting was arranged by a political party called the Social Democratic Federation, and the organizer was a woman named Helen Taylor. The topic was Women and the Next Century, which is of no interest to him. He knew human nature and could make a good guess as to what the future held for these people, and strongly suspected their implied optimism was sadly misplaced. He was informed that he could wait in the hall if he so wished, and he therefore entered and looked around for an optimum seating position among the rows of 60 wooden chairs. The room itself was oak-panelled and longer than it was wide, with a high table set up for the speaker at midpoint. Illumination was by several gas lights hanging from the ceiling, but these remained unlit in the afternoon, as the large windows provided ample illumination. Those 60 chairs set out in a hall that could accommodate twice that number indicated that the organizers were not anticipating a large audience. He chose a seat just inside the door and to the left rear, nearest a statue of Hermes, or Mercury in his Roman incarnation, the herald of the gods. That way, everyone who entered or exited had to pass through his field of view, and he could see every other seating position. Another added benefit was that most would not notice him at the back. However, rather than just sit there for more than an hour, he decided to do some minor exploring, but left his coat draped over the back of the chair to indicate occupancy. He kept his hat. Everyone wore hats in the streets, and to go without one suggested a disregard for propriety that would attract attention. He informed the matron of his intention, but her only comment was that it was his coat. So he stepped forth into the courtyard and onto Commercial Street once again, and rather than backtracking, he walked further south. Maybe he could pick up a souvenir of his visit, or perhaps a present for someone. He passed a few businesses, corn merchants, hay sales, a veterinary surgeon, timber merchant, and then a tailor's shop. He decided to miss that one since they were unlikely to have off-the-peg clothing that would fit him, and he did not have time for much else. Drugs were not much use either, so he passed by the East London dispensary until he came to William Stracker's stationery business. Definitely possible, he thought, and entered. It was not a large place, but apparently well stocked with everything one might expect. The assistant was busy with another customer, so he browsed the goods for sale until he came to the counter where pens and pencils were sold. What immediately caught his eye was a remarkable gold filigreed fountain pen in what he assumed was mother of pearl. Eventually, the young, bright-eyed shop assistant got to him and began explaining its features, including a solid gold nib and the requirement that it was dropper-filled. It came in a polished wooden box with the dropper and a small square bottle of black ink. As he closely examined the items, he marveled at the craftsmanship and precision, not having seen its like from a human hand. It was his fetish for mechanical things again, he thought. The price was 1 guinea. He could not decide whether that was overpriced or a bargain, but it appeared to be a surprisingly high-class item for the area. In Whitechapel, that was more than a skilled labourer earned in a week, or a servant in a month, at least according to Alexandra. What he did know was that back home it would be worth far more than that, especially in its pristine presentation box, and so bought it using one of the gold sovereigns he carried, and some change. With it wrapped in brown paper and string, he exited the shop feeling rather pleased with himself, and some of the edge taken off his displeasure at the situation. Next stop as he approached Whitechapel High Street was the Matthew Nicholas Coffee Rooms, again with a surprisingly tidy exterior. He could certainly kill some time with a cup of coffee and a slice of bread and butter, if such were available, since he had not had food or drink for almost a full day. Inside it was a different story, and he almost immediately regretted his choice. The interior was a series of wooden booths with a chest-high partition between them, each furnished with uncomfortable-looking benches and a table. Once away from the windows, the gloom deepened the further he moved inwards among the noisy clientele who were mostly seated, again, all wearing hats. Some were wearing old battered top hats, and he briefly wondered what the relative significance of that might mean. Was it a statement of social status? Among the voices, he singled out conversations in Yiddish, Russian, and Italian. The roof was slow, only slightly above his head height, and he could see the bare wooden joists and the planks of the floor above him, all supported by a thick oak beam that stretched the length of the establishment. The people of both sexes were generally ragged and old before their time. He briefly caught a glimpse of a woman wearing a kind of muslin cap, smiling at her companion who was out of sight. Some of her front teeth were missing, again common. For the poor, dentistry here consisted of a visit to the local blacksmith, or barbers for a foot in the chest, a pair of pliers, and some laudanum, if they were lucky. He was eternally grateful that his teeth did not decay, or if they were damaged, would regrow rapidly and painlessly. The word Dickensian popped into his consciousness. He was familiar with the works of the author, but did not originally wonder whether he might have been exaggerating the conditions. It appeared not.
Thanks, Michael. I'll read for a bit. Curious, hungry eyes turned upon him as he moved to an empty table, and a young boy ran up before he was barely seated. "What can I get for you, sir?" "A cup of coffee and a slice of bread and butter, please." "That will be threepence, sir," said the boy, waiting. Money required in advance, it appeared. He handed over 3 pennies and was grateful that there was not going to be haggling over change, or more likely being shortchanged. The boy raced away again without asking him how he liked it. There was no milk or sugar on the table itself, and he braced himself for an interesting experience while leaning back, trying not to make eye contact with the clientele. Sitting on the end of the bench closest to the aisle, he placed his hat on the table. Although it marked him out even more so as an outsider, he did not want the brim to obstruct his upward vision if someone walked past him or stood next to him. From long experience, he prepared for a quick exit in case of trouble. That was the last thing he needed right now. Not that he expected it in daylight and a crowded venue, lacking that vital catalyst for stupidity and violence, namely alcohol. Still, best be prepared. Across the aisle lay a rather lean-looking mongrel with its ribs showing. As it saw him, it whimpered and tried to ease itself under the table at which its master sat. Animals can tell, he thought. Their perceptions were unsullied by expectations or explanations, and it recognized an unnatural presence when it saw one. He started to speculate on what it might eat in this city of poverty and starvation, and concluded the answer was probably rats. A working dog, perhaps. Maybe a ratter helping to keep down the vermin. He sympathized. "What's the matter, Jess?" came the question from a rough, shaven, heavily jowled man wearing a tawdry and battered old top hat. Looking up from the dog, he met Carl's unswerving gaze, quickly licking his lips. He hesitated briefly when he saw how big Carl was, and then, "Sorry, sir, hope old Jess ain't bothering you. We don't get gents such as yourself here often. You looking for anything in particular? If it's company you need, I'm your man, sir." What he did not need was company, especially that provided by the local pimp. These people could smell money. Thank you, I shall bear that in mind should the need arise. Suit yourself, came the sullen reply. Further talk was interrupted in a timely manner by the return of the boy, wearing a plain white plate. Bearing a plain white plate with bread and a magic mug which is laid before him. He took out his knife, opened it, and placed it beside the plate, since no cutlery was supplied by the establishment. He noticed that the furtive glances he had been getting from 1 or 2 other patrons ceased when the blade appeared. Big and armed was obviously not a fortuitous combination that people in their line of business wanted to encounter. The coffee was, to put it mildly, rather mediocre, but reassuringly hot. Tasting it, he noted that it was adulterated with chicory and carrots, a puzzling addition, since assuming he was correct. The proprietor had not added milk, but there was brown sugar. Still, nowhere near as bad as the lead from the water pipes and the salted bacterial debris. However, the caffeine content was surprisingly high, which, coupled with the sugar, may have accounted for its popularity. He adjusted his palate to make it more agreeable, then cut a chunk of the buttered white bread and popped it in his mouth. It was, unsurprisingly, mixed with the whitening agent plaster of Paris. The butter was only slightly rancid and spread lightly on the generous doorstep. All in all, not as bad as he was expecting. He threw the last morsel to the dog, which snapped it up in an instant, looking to him for more in a manner far less fearful. How to make friends and influence people, or in this case, dogs. Not that there was much difference, he thought to himself. Standing without further ado, he retrieved his hat and exited the coffee house. Still half an hour remained, so back to the hall to wait. Emily Mackenzie arrived early, accompanied by her mother, and took a seat front and centre stage, not merely because she wanted a good view, but for the more pragmatic reason of ease of access. She was feeling not at all well, having spent yet another uncomfortable and sleepless night that further sapped her strength. The thought of having to navigate between rows of seated people did not appeal. In addition, being front row made it easier to socialize with any friends and acquaintances who may also attend without the necessity of her having to move. The first thing she noticed upon entry to the almost empty hall was a chair at the back with a coat thrown carelessly across it, which was unusual, or thought no more of it. A few minutes later, she was approached by Helen, one of the leading lights of the party, accompanied by a young man who was apparently to be the guest speaker. The topic of conversation between them was one she disliked and wished she could avoid, namely her health, or lack of it, and the necessity of having to withdraw from party events and charitable works. It seemed that Helen too had similar problems, and this was, for Emily, the last time either of them were likely to be seen at such a gathering. When the embarrassing encounter was over, the only thing she could feel grateful for was her mother, sitting adjacent to her, not interrupting or speaking on her behalf, which she hated. Since moving back to her old home, it had been a sensitive subject between them, resulting in a number of arguments. By then, the seats had begun to fill up and the noise and bustle slowly increased. At once, several people turned to look at the hall entrance. A giant of a man had entered and then stepped to one side, presumably to allow his eyes to adjust to the dim interior, or perhaps looking for friends or simply somewhere to sit. A fraction of a second later, his eyes locked with hers, and he removed his hat and bowed slightly. Instinctively, she turned around, wondering to whom he had gestured, but nobody was there. When she turned back again, he was moving to the chair with the coat. He was obviously not what might be termed a gentleman, nor did he appear to be a member of the lower orders. She searched her memory for any recollection of ever having met such a person, but could find none. At that point, she was distracted by a fit of coughing and quickly removed a small embroidered handkerchief from her sleeve to hold over her mouth until it subsided. Edith, would you like to read a little bit more? Edith? Oh, sorry.
Saw her immediately upon re-entering the hall.
Yeah, I think so.
In profile and the seat. There's quite a lot of mistakes in this. She was in profile and seated centrally, surrounded by several older women. As he stood there, she turned to look at him, and he bowed in acknowledgement, being rather amused that she appeared to think it was not directed at her. In the time since the photograph had been taken, she had visibly deteriorated from some ailment. She still wore her auburn hair in a bun, but her face was far leaner, and she had dark rings under her blue eyes, accentuated by a deathly white complexion, despite an attempt to ameliorate the pallor with rouge. In real life, it also appeared she needed glasses and wore pince-nez on the bridge of her nose, secured by a lanyard around her neck. She was obviously possessed of a certain amount of vanity, at least when it came to photography. The dress was, as far as he could tell, the one worn in the picture, being dark blue, fully sleeved and buttoned up to the neck. As he walked to his seat, he saw her coughing, and when that finally subsided, he caught a glimpse of flecks of blood on the white handkerchief as she removed it from her mouth. Maybe the mission was not going to be as difficult as he had feared. When everyone was seated, he discovered that he and Emily Mackenzie had one thing in common. They were both taller than anyone else in the hall by a head. Looking around, he counted 42 people, including himself, most of whom were women. A few minutes later, a bell sounded from the speaker's table, and relative silence ensued. An austere-looking, dark-haired woman in her early 60s, who seemed to model herself on a young Queen Victoria, faced them and introduced herself as Helen Taylor. There then followed perfunctory announcements concerning people and events about which he had even less interest than she appeared to exhibit. Finally, she introduced the speaker, one Herbert Wells, who was about to graduate with a degree in zoology from the University of London. As he stood up to thank her for the introduction, Carl noticed how thin he was, verging on cadaverous and quite as unhealthy looking as any he had seen in the street earlier. Something of a contrast to the well-fed middle-class people around him. Yet Carl knew of him as the 23-year-old student stood there in his cheap jacket and trousers, which had undoubtedly seen better days. This hall seemed to be quite a nexus of history, and he half wondered what input, if any, came from the courier. Not that it was any of his business. However, he was beginning to think that these people might be dangerous, and resolved to spend as little time here as possible, remembering what the curates had said earlier in the day. As soon as Wells began to speak in his high-pitched voice, Carl started to listen, fascinated by his flights of imagination into the coming century. It was to be the era of socialism, the emancipation of women, and the triumph of the machine, of rationality in all things, and the end of religion, along with sexual repression. It would also be an era of free love, where meaningless mores and conventions were cast aside and people were allowed to be their deepest selves. He spoke of self-propelled carriages, revolutionizing transport, of flying machines and submarine boats, of electricity powering the world. It was to be a world under one united government, where wealth was divided according to labor, poverty abolished, women occupied half of all positions of authority, and scientific principles reigned supreme. Nor did he neglect to mention the dark side by raising the spectre of these machines being used for evil. But overall, he was suffused by optimism and faith in mankind. At the end of an hour, he was impressed, so much so, in fact, that he resolved to stay well away from the man and even out of sight if possible. He felt uncomfortable when Wells's eyes roamed across the audience and wished he was a bit shorter and less conspicuous. There then followed questions from the audience, quite a few of which were highly skeptical of his prognostications, especially those relating to sexual matters. The session was formally closed by Helen Taylor, thanking their guests for an entertaining and thought-provoking talk and inviting the audience to partake of light refreshments in the drawing room. As people began to make their way to either the exit or food, Carl left his hat and coat, but not the valuable little parcel, and made a beeline for Emily Mackenzie, who remained seated. Almost barging people aside in his haste, while apologizing profusely for his foreign bad manners, he finally stood before her. She observed a strange, handsome boy with great green eyes and rather unusual dress and hair, as she had noted when he first arrived, probably no older than 18 or 19. It appeared now that his salutation was indeed aimed towards her and not someone else. Curious. He introduced himself as Carl Dulac from America, so maybe that's what people were like over there. She had never met an American, but it would explain his peculiar accent and the odd phrases he used. He indicated that it was imperative he spoke with her privately for a few minutes.
Thanks. Maybe our resident representative of America could continue the reading, Michael. You'd be so kind.
Well, me too. Okay. Carl followed as one of her friends helped her to the library, where she sat at a table. As he approached, he could smell the disease upon her and confirmed her malady. Taking a seat opposite, he placed his small parcel on the table and stared at her, waiting for her to speak after they were alone. For her part, she noted that he moved rather strangely, with a very fluid gait. Well, his first words surprised and offended her. I'm going to treat you as my equal. She cut him off curtly, replying in a tone that dripped sarcasm. Sir, your magnanimity is exceeded only by your generous condescension, and you, a boy not even old enough to shave, very precocious. Leaning back to await his reply, she looked down her nose at him through the ridiculous glasses which made her look like an owl. He laughed. I have not been so eloquently put in my place for decades. My apologies for assumptions, with your reasonable one being the more forgivable. However, I did not say I would treat you as the equal of a man or boy. I am neither. I said my equal. No human comes close to being my equal in any sphere of activity, whether physical or intellectual. She froze in place, stunned at such an outrageous claim, but allowed him to continue. I'm sorry, but I must speak clearly and to the point so that there is no misunderstanding. Please forgive me if you find anything I say offensive. It is not my intention, but we have little time. Do you believe me when I say you are dying and will be dead within weeks or a few months? She nodded slowly. Yes, that seemed a plausible guess. It was so unfair she almost cried at the words, but that would never do. Dignified to the end, she thought. I have come a great distance to meet you and ensure you live. I can cure the consumption that is killing you. However, in exchange, you must promise to come with me and serve the organization to which I belong for a minimum of 5 years, and possibly much longer. In that time, you will not be required to do anything that conflicts with your moral or ethical principles. Now, do you require some proof that my offer is genuine and feasible? Of course I do, affecting a weary voice in an attempt to hide the hope. You come along claiming to be able to accomplish what all the expensive doctors have failed to do, and add that the ludicrous claim to not be a person at all. Please show me. In which case I require one more thing. Your promise that whatever you accept or decline, that whether you accept or decline my offer, you will never communicate what you learn about me in the next few minutes. Ever. She nodded, as long as what you show me is not immoral or illegal. He agreed. First proof is indirect. What color are my eyes? She looked closely. It was obvious, emerald green. Now I am going to close my eyes and then open them. Tell me the color each time I do that. What was this supposed to mean? She wondered, but quickly discovered the truth as he closed them and then opened them. Black, she uttered in astonishment, becoming fascinated as his eyes cycled through colors of the rainbow. That's quite an impressive conjuring trick you have there, she remarked, almost absent-mindedly, intrigued and impressed, despite her skepticism, and for the first time in 2 years felt that dangerous hope rising once more. She could not stand it should be dashed again. One more time, and when his eyes opened, she recoiled slightly. There were 2 perfect spherical mirrors where his eyes had been. She could see her distorted image in them. Now watch carefully, and he slowly opened the eyelids a second time, the mirrors sliding upwards, like a cat, a nictitating membrane, I believe it's called. She wondered aloud. Yes, he said, mildly surprised. Most people don't know the name for that extra eyelid. May I assume you are well educated? She smiled and leaned forward slightly. Now for the second item of proof. He pulled the knife from his pocket and opened the blade. It locked into place with an audible click. Bone-handled and made of Sheffield's finest high-carbon steel, honed to shaving sharp. Not that he needed to shave, as she had already observed. It amused her when he mentioned that. Holding his left hand open, he slowly drove the blade through the palm of the hand, where it remained sticking out from the other side. She flinched momentarily from empathy, almost feeling the blades slide through her own flesh. Don't be squeamish. You need to see this is not a trick with a fake knife. She took his hand and examined it with fascination. Now slowly pull it out. At first she was hesitant, but when she grasped the handle, it slid out smoothly. She felt grateful it was so easy and that there was no grinding contact with bone. And look at the wound, please. She watched as the skin sealed itself with not the tiniest hint of blood. I think us on either side.
Sorry.
On
Yeah.
either hand or blade. Does that hurt? He looked at his hand again, which she was still holding. It was not a human hand. The joints were bulbous and the skin unmarred by lines or even whorls on the fingertips, and the nails were more like claws. Under normal circumstances, she might have thought it a bad case of arthritis. It was a cold hand with a texture reminiscent of saddle leather, hard and inflexible. Physician, heal thyself. Now bend my fingers back slowly. You won't hurt them. He did as requested, and they curled perfectly onto the back of his hand in a kind of reversed fist. See, they are fully flexible, both backwards and forwards. Would you like to learn more? She should have been frightened, but what was the worst he could do that God and nature were not already about to accomplish? What are you?
Oh, thanks, Michael. I mean, perhaps Heward, you'd like to take over. Oh no, I think yeah, go, yeah, please.
He hesitated and then spoke. There is a great deal that I'm not allowed to tell you, at least for now. However, I can make you one promise, and my kind always keep their promises. I will never tell you an outright lie if you ask me a question. Of course, I might not answer the question, or I might not tell you the whole truth, or I might tell you the truth in a misleading manner, but never a direct lie. As he smiled, she noticed his teeth. They were translucent and perfect. In fact, every feature of his was perfect. Perfect symmetry in everything. Perfect skin, and literally not a hair out of place. He wondered how she had not seen all this the moment she laid eyes upon him and stared openly. He returned her gaze, unwavering and unperturbed. Whatever social graces and conventions he affected were only skin deep, he realized. Now, as to what I am, all I can say is that I was once like you, and I died, and I was reborn. It is the life I am offering you. Also, I'm not a supernatural creature, and none of this involves selling your soul to the devil or any other such ridiculous notion. Oh, to put your mind at rest, you do not have to first die. She smiled despite herself. This was just unbelievable. I have read of Varney the vampire, but not from what might be termed a reliable source. I have never heard of that gentleman, and I am not a vampire. But so someone like you travels from the ends of the earth, or at least America, in order to save a dying schoolteacher. Why? You are special. So special that what is normally a job for menials was delegated to me. If you really knew who I was, you would be flattered. Even I have not been vouchsafed to reason. All I can say is that if you accept, your future will be full of wonders, and your life will be as long as you want. She thought for a few seconds before answering. How will this cure change me? Will I turn into a monster unable to walk in daylight or need to suck blood? Will I still look human? How is the cure administered? Carl explained the process. No, she would not become a monster. Yes, she could still walk in twilight. No, she would not need a special diet, just the opposite. And the cure would be administered by the prick of a needle and not a bite in the neck or anywhere else for that matter. However, for the first week or so, she would be fevered, and during that time, he needed to be close to her. She would also suffer from a ravenous hunger as her body was rebuilt. No blood, though, just regular food in gluttonous quantities. There will be numerous side effects, all beneficial. For example, your mind and senses will become sharper. You will become much stronger physically. Disease will never bother you again. The words flow with an unseemly haste that betrayed her desperation. I accept. When will you do this? As the words left her mouth, it was almost as if someone else were speaking them. He felt disconnected from reality, like everything was a particularly vivid dream as the consciousness of her surroundings faded and the world took on a strange, fluid ambience. There was nothing but the two of them in a timeless world, empty save for hope and promise.
Oh, thank you, Hugh. That seems a good moment to, yeah, Janine, perhaps you continue.
He explained that he would need to take a blood sample and then wait a full day before administering a cure. There's one more thing I need to tell you. After it takes effect, if you renege on the agreement, I will ensure that you will revert to your current condition. This is not a trivial undertaking, and you do not yet have any idea of the massive effort that has gone into this meeting. What he did not tell her was that she was coming with him whether she liked it or not, and her being weakened by consumption would simply be a convenience. Nor did he mention that a considerable number of people might die if they tried to stop him. No matter what cost, were the words used. Now hold out your hand and open it, please. It was not a hand used to manual labor, as he had deduced from her claimed occupation. Clean, neatly trimmed and polished fingernails with the cuticles pushed back spoke of a pride in appearance when she removed her cotton gloves and bared her skin. As she did so, he laid what looked like a tiny wallet on the table, opening it to reveal several short needles. He took her wrist, removed one of the needles from the wallet, and faster than her eye could follow, he must have pricked her index finger as she felt a sharp pain. Instinctively, she tried to pull back, but her wrist might as well have been nailed to the wall. There was not the slightest movement. She stared, almost hypnotized, as a bead of blood grew on her fingertip. Then he leaned forward, and as she watched his tongue lash out like a snake, again almost too fast to see, as he licked it. I thought you said you were not a vampire. I'm not, but what I'm doing is tasting the spiral of your life. Everyone has a different spiral, and when I know yours, I will know what changes to make. Tomorrow we must meet again at this time, and I will complete the treatment. In the meantime, you need to make arrangements for what is to come. Where are you staying? The address was that of her parents, 50 Berkeley Square, with which he was familiar, but in an entirely different context, and it made him slightly uneasy. Mystery piled upon mystery. Now comes the difficult part, he thought. I will need to be close to you for the first 3 days in case there are complications. You will also need to be attended every hour of the day. So will your parents be amenable to me remaining in an adjacent room? And do they have servants who can take care of your bodily needs? The answer to the second question was yes, but the first would obviously depend on his meeting the parents and making a good impression. Finally, slaking her unspoken curiosity deduced from her glances at the parcel. I bought a rather expensive pen to take home with me later. She seemed mildly disappointed as he wondered what she was expecting. No matter, though. He emerged from the library, walking slowly with Emily on his arm, and they re-entered the hall. May I introduce you to my mother? This is Mr. Carl Dulac, a friend of mine. Carl, this is my mother, Mrs. Anna Mackenzie. Carl is visiting from America. He was immediately struck by the similarity between mother and daughter. If it were not for the obvious age difference, they could have been twins, although Emily was at least 12 inches taller. Very pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Mackenzie. Emily never mentioned she had such an attractive mother, he said as he offered his hand, which she took with a smile. It was something of a risk, but one of life lessons was that everyone liked a bit of flattery, even if badly done. Well, you certainly have a silver tongue for one of your age. How do you know my daughter? I'm a lot older than I look, ma'am, and widely traveled. I know your daughter by reputation, which has spread to a remarkable degree, which is no lie, he thought, the word remarkable being a vast understatement. She is quite a special person, and I have come to offer my services in her hour of need. I'm sure she will explain all later, dropping that one back into her lap. I've invited Carl to join us at home tomorrow afternoon. I'm sure he will be more eloquent than I, and will, no doubt, regale us with his adventures in foreign countries. Mrs. Mackenzie stared at him for an uncomfortable few seconds, looking directly into his eyes. You are welcome, sir. I look forward to your tall tales. Unafanya nataka kuana mawamama meme bora, he said. It's Swahili and means you make me want to be a better man. I speak many languages, Mrs. Mackenzie, and my tales are taller than myself. The impression he planted was one of foreign and well-educated. Emily smiled at the compliment that was also a joke, only she understood. Tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Incidentally, Carl, where are you staying? I plan to take a slow walk to Claridge's and see whether they have a room for me. Nothing prepared in advance because I only arrived in London this morning. Not that he needed to sleep, but he did need somewhere to get off the streets, especially at night. The price at this point was immaterial. He had his foot in the door. Upon hearing that Anna Mackenzie warned him that between here and there were some seriously dangerous and crime-ridden areas where even police feared to go. To which he replied, "Fear not, madam," to misquote Psalm 23, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for I am the most ferocious thing in that valley." Emily completely understood, but Mrs. Mackenzie looked dubious and obviously believed it to be youthful bravado. Well, perhaps, but try to avoid the rockeries in St. Giles. Remain on the major thoroughfares. He said he would do so, but not knowing where they were and not wanting to inconvenience them further, his agreement was at best merely polite. Anna Mackenzie continued by saying that their house and Claridge's were close together and he was welcome to share their carriage. He politely declined, explaining that he would like to see something of London on foot. The reality was that he did not want to give her the opportunity to question him, nor examine him in detail before he entered their house tomorrow, let alone risk having the invitation rescinded. Excuse me. He escorted the women to the carriage that awaited them, with Emily leaning heavily on his arm. "Are you able to ascend yourself, or would you like me to lift you?" As she put her foot on the step, he took her waist in both hands and took most of the weight off her feet, easing her entry into the vehicle while her mother took her hand from above. As he did so, he felt her body shaking from the effort and gauged her weight around 8 stone. She was slowly starving to death. He watched them depart and began to make his way west on foot. It was nearly 6 o'clock and would be dark within the hour.
Thanks very much, Jeanette. Perhaps Michael, you to the finish off. Michael in Cologne.
Once out of sight of Toynbee Hall, Anna turned to her daughter and asked after that peculiar encounter. "He's offered to cure me of consumption and has shown me things that make me believe he can do it. The price he wants is my service for at least 5 years. That boy? It sounds ridiculous. What did he tell you? He swore me to secrecy. All I can say is that next time you see him, look very closely at him. He is no boy. And that bit of flattery in Swahili was literally true, as was his joke involving Psalm 23. I pity anyone who tries to harm him in the rookeries or anywhere else. But they would likely not survive the encounter, no matter how many cutthroats there may be." With that, she lapsed into silence and would not be drawn further on the matter, partly because she was worried she might have said too much already. Carl had not said what he might do if she broke her promise of silence, but instinctively knew it would not be good. "We will see," was her mother's concluding remark as they made their way home, and she brooded upon the words of her daughter, hoping against hope for a miracle, yet dreading disappointment. Nevertheless, she was intensely curious. For all her faults, nobody had ever accused Emily of being either gullible or stupid. Quite the opposite. She must have seen something truly extraordinary. Still, if he was a charlatan of some kind, it would become apparent the moment money was mentioned. Additionally, that boy did look, well, strange would be an understatement, even though she could not quite discern why. In the meantime, Carl started westwards towards Claridge's in Mayfair. By his estimation, it should be a journey of no more than 90 minutes, even in the dark. So, back up again towards Spitalfields, then onto the Clerkenwell Road, through Farringdon, and then to Holborn and Bloomsbury, which he had known in more prosperous times. At some point, he must have taken a wrong turn, or more likely had an inaccurate map, for he found himself in narrow, unlit streets of dirty, windowless houses and pubs noisy with singing, arguing, and alcohol, despite being early in the evening. It was also getting very cold, and he estimated it would go well below freezing, since as he gazed upwards, he could see stars in the moonless, murky sky. Not that it bothered him. The visibility must have been bad, for many people did not seem to notice him until his outline appeared as a deeper shadow in the dark, and they gave him a wide berth. Even a polite good evening did little to mollify their suspicions and possibly fear of the obvious and huge outsider. A little later, he came across the bright warmth of a form huddled in the doorway of a large unlit building, all but invisible to normal eyes, and heard the uneven breath of someone cold and shivering. The woman did not see or hear him until he stood immediately before her, and he could tell from the way she was losing heat that she had little in terms of clothing and may well die of exposure in the coming hours. Karl could also smell the copious amounts of gin she had consumed, which, although providing the illusion of warmth, would hasten death in these conditions. "I see you are cold. Have you no home or shelter?" As he knelt, she simply said, "No money, no home," and turned her face back toward the wall. Grey-haired and in her 50s perhaps, was all he could immediately gauge. Judging by the colours his eyes could see, it appeared her slurred voice was not merely due to alcohol, but the onset of hypothermia, and it presented something of a dilemma. The strong advice issued by the society was not to get involved and let fate pay itself out. At least, that was what was told to the curates, but he was not one of them, and had his own code of conduct when it came to mortality. For every life he ended prematurely, he tried to save someone, almost heedless of the effect on the web. Additionally, here he was rushing headlong to save Emily, whose life and death would have far more effect than saving some drunken pauper who should die in the rookery this night. Plus, in the balance of life, he was still hugely in debt in his own mind, so he opened his coat and moved closer to her. "I have money for you and warmth," he said, as he raised his own body temperature far beyond human levels, acutely aware that if anyone were to come across him in this position, their first thoughts would be Ripper or Varney the vampire. He found the caricature somewhat amusing, but in reality there was no danger, for he would see or appear any approach from far away. After a few minutes, she uttered a slurred, "I'm hot. Who are you?" Not only hot, thought Karl. Smelly, with rotten teeth, bad breath, and a serious lack of hygiene, as he opened her hand and placed 10 shillings in it, telling her what he was doing since she could not see in the darkness. "I am also going to leave you my coat. Wrap yourself in it and you will not die tonight. Tomorrow get some food instead of gin and count yourself lucky. Tell me your name that I might find you in 1,000 years if you survive Judgment Day." "Heather Jakes. Are you an angel or a demon? Depends who you ask," he said glibly as he walked onward, his abstract numerically based conscience salved for the time being. Maybe she would stay there or find one of the pubs and imbibe more gin before finding a cheap bed for the night. In any event, she would see the light of a new day with a new opportunity for life. Whether she took it was up to her. It was no longer his business.
Michael, what do you think? Should we call a halt there?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Yes, yeah.
There doesn't seem to be any
cut-off point.
Yeah,
Obvious cut-off
indeed,
point.
indeed. So, yeah, what is the opinion of the readers?
It's uncannily reminiscent of the short story by Guillaume Fay that we read from Archaeofuturism. Is it a translation anyway of something?
No, it's not.
That's interesting. A translation. I was going. Do you have information, by the way, Stead? So if we guess,
Yeah. That is an interesting. I don't see the similarity myself. One thing that it did remind me of somewhat is the atmosphere of is it The Man That Fell to Earth with David Bowie? Michael, you're not a film.
Yes, a little bit. Yes.
Yeah, with
well,
the eye kind of
yes,
eye
yes,
thing.
that's quite true. Yes, I hadn't thought of that. Yes.
Yeah, as someone that was in human form but not
Yes,
human,
yes,
had a
yes.
preternatural sort of quality. I not having read this before, I found myself smiling repeatedly at the nice way the author had to describe things. So in that sense, I think he narrated the story in a way that it excited one's sort of anticipation for the outcome. So I enjoyed the way it was written. I enjoyed the prose style. Please, I mean, tell other opinions. Michael, what was your thoughts of how?
I have sort of mixed feelings about it. I found the style a little bit forced. I think it could be quite modern because the punctuation is almost not existent, which seems to be a modern fault. I would guess it's written by an American. One or two giveaways, I'd be very surprised. I would risk a bit of money that it was written by an American. Well, I wouldn't now. Maybe I almost would actually. I had mixed feelings about it. I thought it was very vivid.
Yeah, but the smells were quite good. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
and so I think that was very positive, and I think it was presented a very realistic picture, although consciously realistic, of making a critique of the romanticism about the past, which so many people have. And it reminded me of a writer called Pallister, but Pallister is so good that I can't read him. He's one of the few writers. He's so vivid. I actually feel almost sick reading him. I don't know if you've written. I can't remember his first name.
Oh,
he wrote a book about the 18th century, which is too convincing. It's so depressing that I wouldn't want to read anything more. I've read two of his books. He's the only writer I admire who I don't want to touch.
He's a historian, is he, Michael?
No, he wrote historical novels.
Oh,
One
historical
was about
novels,
this cathedral where somebody's been murdered and it's under the stones, and he's received by this person who is, as it was then conceived, an invert, and it's done with and then the sort of the smells of the sewage and everything is but it's not done quite as contrived as this writer. I think Pallister's a better writer probably, but yet very, very vivid, and in that sense worthy of respect in that sense. And I'm not quite sure if it's a sort of diatribe against that kind of romanticism, or it's going to morph into a proper science fiction. It doesn't seem to be quite certain if it's one or the other. So that would be
we've only dipped our toes. Heward, your thoughts?
Seems to me likely to be American science fiction, but I also find myself historical science fiction in a way, of course. But I find myself wondering, a book I've never read and know very little about, but as a kind of long shot, a shot in the dark, as it were, the Wyndham Lewis and the Apes of God popped into my mind. But
really? I mean, Wyndham Lewis's style of writing is not like this. I think it's as Michael said, this is written in our time, whereas with Wyndham Lewis, it had a feeling for sort of an older age. It was a bit more spiky. I mean, like his artwork, really. I think. I wouldn't. But the main thing is, I mean, what did you think of it in terms of its quality? Did you think it was? Were you entertained by the reading?
I think it was coherently unfolded.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
I would imagine
very conservative, not giving too much away.
I imagine that it was written by someone. It could be one of the more obscure novels of Heinlein, or it could even be one of the more obscure novels of Asimov. But it seems to me that it was probably written by somebody who has a very advanced quasi-scientific religion worldview. Trying to think, not Ron Hubbard, but
who's that person whose name begins with B? Who wrote on the Bethlehem Star, and then the kills the butterfly? He did mostly short stories. Ballard.
Oh, yeah.
But I think Ballard has a smoother style in my memory. But that occurred to me as
it seemed to me almost entirely lacking in redundant verbiage.
Yeah, it's strong. It was the prose was was taunt and muscular.
Quite overdone. This didn't seem to me overdone at all. It seemed to be a highly analytic style of writing, and therefore that's the territory of someone like Asimov. But I don't think it is Asimov, but I might be wrong.
Janine, did you enjoy it?
Yes and no.
By the way, this isn't something I've written, so you can say, didn't I?
Political answer. It's a little bit too detailed for me. I think.
Oh, that's an interesting point. Interesting, yeah.
Rather long to get into the story. One of my pet peeves is that, and I agree with you. I think it's an American, and I think it's contemporary. Because why? They don't give you the name of the character. They refer to him as he. So you know that it's author intrusion, because we're not placed in the interiority of the character. We don't even know his name yet. Really, we don't know who he is. It not in over here. There's a fad of cross genre, and it reminds me of a kind of dystopian paranormal. There's this feeling of, is this guy a space guy, or is he just a future guy? When he talks about the web, is he talking about the matrix and the infusion of the machine and the person? So in that sense, I think it's good for the style and for the subject matter, but I'm not thoroughly convinced that writing historical stuff, Americans, they tend to want to sound like Dickens. And it has a Dickens quality to it in terms of talking about all the smells and how horrible it is in London, and the children, and they're underfed, and the fact that they are talking about a meeting that is probably a meeting of socialists and communists. I don't know what, but they talk about the party. So that I kind of get this feeling that this is a message story about how things were so horrible, but they're going to get better. And here's this guy who has lived a long time, because he talks about when he was there before, when it was prosperous, which means kind of Atlantis kind of thing. Was he living in New London when it was prosperous? When? The 1950s? I'm not quite sure what the timeline is for this guy. And that irritates me, because I want to know when, who, what, where, when, and why. And the reader the writer gives us that information, but it takes too long to get into the story, because the story is him rescuing the woman. But we don't know. Now, the curia obviously is religion, And I said you were talking about where the Catholic Church is dominant, there is no Reformation. And that's what this sounds like to me, is that the church has now come to dominate. And here is this guy from the Curia and the curates, and he's obviously a Monsignor because he's high up, but he's not a cardinal or the Pope. And he's out getting this woman. Now, we don't know why she's so special, but she's a school teacher, which means she's allegedly smart. So they want to save the smart people and be nice to the dying poor people.
The
A
fact
lot of
that
that. Yeah, I agree with a lot of that.
I don't understand it, but my curiosity has been pleasantly aroused, and that I think is a good thing. I am interested to find out, what is behind the story that's so far been presented. So yeah, I mean that works for me dramatically. So
Well, I think if the story had started 4 pages, if we had done away with the first 4 pages and actually gotten into the story, by now we would actually know what's happened to this girl.
So you don't like reading to discover things? You sort of like it to be kind of said at the beginning. You don't like that mystery.
Well, I'm not quite sure why we need to know about, because it's not really information. It's just telling us about him going to this family and he's not dressed right, and tell him you're an American, and so obviously he is not of this world in the way that we think of ordinary people.
Well, I mean, up to the point where he was doing things with his eyes and everything, I wasn't expecting that. I mean, that came as a surprise to me. I thought he was, I don't know, I had no idea, but
I was waiting for that.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't then. I didn't.
Like, okay, now when does he get to show his superpowers? Because obviously he's
okay.
not whether he's a robot or whether he's I don't know. But I agree with Hayward. I think it may be kind of an Asimov kind of thing, written
Michael, are you in France? Are you there? I know you said you had to.
I think he had to go.
Yeah.
He sent a message.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fine. Let's have a look. Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. I understand that.
How much longer is it, Stead? How much do you know? How long we have to go?
I don't know. I mean, if anyone is interested, I can send you the remainder, and I think I can probably send the remainder of the text. But so I mean, the first chapter is, in the way I printed out, is it's quite widely spaced. It's about 115 pages, I think. So yeah, I mean, if anyone's interested, let me know.
And what happened to the girl? What
good.
happened?
Okay. I will send it to you, Janine.
Yeah, thank you.
Definitely. Okay. But I thought that was a good thing. And the next time I will do the other option, and then we can see which is which.
But Stan, can you lead us a little bit in the direction, or we're curious. I mean, is it first right about the American?
No,
it's wrong. I would have lost my money. I am really surprised.
Yeah, he is not an American. I mean, I know of no connection of the man with America. It's a man who is still alive. As far as I'm aware. So, what would that? No,
well, we all thought it was pretty modern. Is that at least right? It was really,
yes, yes, it is. Yeah. So, but not maybe the some of the American spellings put that sort.
Or Americanisms have come into modern English writing. It could be.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe he's read a lot of American authors, and that's coloured his style, I think.
Can you include me in the mailing to Janine, please?
Yes, absolutely. Anyone else wants Michael?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Michael,
yes,
I'll do it.
Who it is at the end.
I'll do it. Yeah. Maybe the next. I've also got another text which I think would be good to read as well, and that is that is a safer text in terms of its literary quality, because that is loosely part of the canon of literature, but it's not a very well known book. So
But I'd still like to be guessing who this person is. I don't know
yeah,
anybody
well,
else.
I mean,
is this one of the more famous works, or is there another work that's much more famous, or is this standard? Did this person write a lot? Has this person written a lot? I mean, if you can give us a few tips.
It's I think it's unlikely you'd know anything by him. I think it's
so it's not a person that if you said the name, everybody would say it.
No.
Okay, I see.
No, absolutely not. But I think this is a very good way to read text without preconceptions. I think it's a good way.
Oh, okay, absolutely, absolutely.
It's very good. The next meeting, I mean, is Father Frank going to do a talk about?
Well, he said if he was pushed, I think he said he could do next month, but he'd much prefer September.
Right.
I'll get on to him again, or you can. Yeah.
I'm certainly happy to introduce the other text that I had for the next month, because there's minimal work to do.
Right. Right.
And that's that. You know, that is. Yeah, that is a decent literary quality, I think. You know, I've been.
So you've read it all. You've read the entire story.
Which one? I've read neither of these texts before.
Oh, but you have read them. Or you said you have.
No, I've read neither of the texts. The other texts I've read about 2 paragraphs. I've also read something about it. I read the introduction by a literary critic who I'm familiar with, so you know, and it's I know enough to know that's got decent literary quality to it, and it relates to somewhere that I'm going to quite soon. So
yes, you're very active, aren't you? You're sallying out.
No.
Climb mountains or something.
Well,
you know, I don't do anything like that. It's very impressive.
Yeah, you do a lot of all sorts of things, Michael, that I don't do. You do lots of things.
You do very few things these days. But anyway, yeah.
So yeah, thanks very much for everyone's company on this nice Sunday afternoon.
Well, it's in America, it's Mother's Day, so happy Mother's Day, Edith.
Oh, it is Mother's Day.
Oh,
so
happy
it
Mother's
is here
Day
too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't know it was. Yeah, Mothering Sunday. I think it's earlier in the year in Britain. I'm not on. Yeah, it was never a thing in my family to celebrate these things, but yeah, it is a good thing. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. Absolutely. All right then. Yeah, good to see everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. And have we got instead? You could probably tell us then when the next one is. If it's you, then you could give a time straight away.
Yeah, June. I don't think I'm doing any. I'm not. I think the first. Yeah, kind of mid June.
Mid-June is fine. Yeah. 16th maybe with that.
Yeah, I think that should be okay. Yeah, Sunday. Yeah, Sunday is a good time. All right then. Shall we wish one another a good Sunday afternoon. Yes, thanks everyone, and
thanks everyone.
See you next.
Good to see Edith again. I thought you disappeared. We got some people who've disappeared. Yeah, all of us until next time.
Okay, bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Au revoir.